Ships moving back and forth, sea blockades put in place, shipping routes reopening. We're getting very mixed messages these days when we look at the Strait of Hormuz. And let's be honest, we have been looking a lot at the Strait of Hormuz. First, Iran blocked the waterway, plunging the world economy into chaos. Now this week, the US started its own blockade, putting pressure on Iran. Now another player might be forced to enter the conflict, China. I want to show you the trajectory of one particular vessel called Rich Starry. It carries the flag of Malawi, but it's become emblematic of this new chapter in this conflict. The ship is Chinese-owned and carrying a Chinese crew. You can see it passing through the Strait of Hormuz on Monday, but then just after passing through, it turns around, potentially to avoid being stopped by the US Navy. After all, the ship had already been under US sanction for transporting Iranian oil. So, how will this back and forth affect China? And what does this change about the delicate relationship between Washington and Beijing? Let's find out. And Eyck Freymann is joining me to do that. He's a Hoover Fellow at Stanford University and an expert when it comes to global energy policy and China. He also authored the book Defending Taiwan, a Strategy to Prevent War with China. Good to see you, Eyck. We can see the path of that ship. Do we know what has happened and why it has turned around exactly? Why would China sail a ship laden through the strait? Do we know, or do we take from that they thought they had the right to proceed?
You know, China has been helping Iran export its sanctioned oil for many years. And this is just the latest chapter in that saga. I think China is not the only global actor that wants to see whether the Trump administration is actually serious about enforcing this blockade. Both on a political level, is it willing to confront a Chinese-owned ship, but also on an operational level, can it see the ships that are moving around, intercept them, board them, and impound them if necessary? I think this is just the beginning of a prolonged effort to test the Trump administration's resolve heading into the Beijing summit, when Trump and Xi Jinping are set to meet in just a few weeks' time.
It's an interesting thought to start us off. You think this was China pushing buttons, maybe flying a kite just to see what would happen and how quickly it would happen?
That's absolutely right. China is using this as a case study to learn about the Trump administration's resolve, about how it responds in different kinds of situations, and to test it and tempt it with actions that could get it more deeply embroiled in the Middle East. Look, it was just reported today in the Financial Times that Iran has been using Chinese satellites to target US bases and civilian infrastructure all across the region. And it's also been reported that China is helping Iran build out its air defenses that were attrited by US and Israeli strikes. And then where did Iran's ballistic missile program come from? This is a decades-old program, and China helped them build it. This has been a problem in the US-China relationship going back all the way to the 1980s. So this is a long-standing relationship between China and Iran. China wants to get that oil out of the strait, but it also wants to probe the Trump administration for weakness.
For the most part, do you think China has been, to this point, before they've started this probing exercise that you talk about, happy enough to sit back and watch the Americans wage an expensive, financially expensive campaign that arguably has cost them some of their reputation as a regional enforcer as well?
In a word, yes. The situation is complicated. I mean, China has always viewed the Middle East as a tinderbox. It doesn't relish or covet the responsibility that the United States has of ensuring freedom of navigation in this region. It has treaded very carefully to try to avoid getting involved in Sunni-Shia conflicts, the Iran-Israel conflict, Israel-Palestine. China wants to present itself as just a commercial actor that's not interested in politics. They'll trade with both sides and so on. But they can't help but getting involved because they have this longstanding relationship with Iran, and because it's so tempting that the United States might dig itself deeper into a hole. I think China is learning a great deal from how the United States has prosecuted this war. They're learning through electronic signals intelligence about how the United States conducts bombing operations. They're looking at satellites to see how the U.S. is organizing its logistics. They've got people on the ground who are trying to learn electromagnetic signatures so they can detect a U.S. fighter jet in flight. And now they see that the Trump administration bungled its way into a Middle Eastern quagmire, like somehow not having calculated that Iran was going to close the strait, the thing that Iran has been threatening to do for 50 years if attacked. So I think they're willing to see how deep the Trump administration is willing to dig itself. China can go without an Iranian oil shipment or two. They can live with a higher oil price for a month or two or three. That's not really the limiting factor here. They're searching for leverage. It's a constant search for leverage. And with the summit coming up in Beijing, they want to prove that they can be useful. And the way to do that is to remind Trump that it's very hard to resolve this problem without Beijing.
You've painted a really vivid picture of what China sees out in front of it. Let's try and understand for everyone else how important the Strait of Hormuz is, particularly for China here. These are the figures showing the destination of oil leaving the Persian Gulf last year. You can clearly see that China is by far the biggest customer here with 5.4 million barrels per day, well ahead of India and South Korea. With that context in mind, and I know you've spoken to this a little already, do you detect signs that China desperately needs to get its oil out of the strait? They are the biggest buyer of Iranian oil, but do they have anything like a desperate or immediate need to get their hands on oil?
No, they don't. And the reason is that chart is misleading. There's only one world oil market with basically one world oil price. And if I buy more from provider A, then I'll buy less from provider B. And that means you buy more from provider B and less than provider A, and the market clears. The question of who bought their oil from where before their war isn't really material. Right. What matters is the global oil price. And China has, the numbers aren't certain, but we estimate they have at least 1.3 billion, probably closer to 2 billion barrels of oil in their strategic petroleum reserve. So that's enough to keep their entire country supplied for several months, and they wouldn't even have to ration. They haven't, as far as we know, released yet from their strategic reserve. The U.S. has, Japan has. So China, as a country that imports oil, doesn't want to live with a higher price. Let's be clear. They would, in the long run, like to see the price of oil come down. But in the short run, I think they're very happy to pay that price to watch the United States get into a diplomatic mess.
So as we look to try to work out how much financial pressure China might be feeling beyond the direct price of oil, how much has the US activity in the Gulf and Iran really disrupted the Chinese economy, and not specifically talking about energy reserves? How much impact has this campaign had on the Chinese economy in terms of, say, for instance, exports?
Some, but not that much. The bigger risk for China is that the rising oil price is going to lead to a global recession. And China needs the rest of the world to keep buying their stuff. So it's less a story of higher oil prices being a problem for China, although China doesn't love that. And it's more a question of, if the world goes into a recession because of this, this is not good for China's exporters. But I really don't think that China is being motivated by commercial reasoning here. This is just such a tempting geopolitical moment to wear out the patience of the United States, of the American people for foreign adventures, to create a sense among American allies in the Indo-Pacific region that America doesn't have their best interests at heart, is creating these crises far away that cause pain for them without consulting them. China has a focus on its own region, and it wants to keep the United States as distracted and as divided from its allies as possible. And prolonging this crisis is just the best way to do that.
Right. So as to what comes next, Donald Trump has aired his thoughts on Truth Social. Like his latest, China is very happy that I'm permanently opening the Strait of Hormuz. I'm doing it for them also and the world. This situation will never happen again. They have agreed not to send weapons to Iran. President Xi will give me a big fat hug when I get there in a few weeks. Now, I know sometimes it does seem like there is limited value in reporting him verbatim, Ike, but it's what we have. Do you see hugs on the horizon between Trump and Xi?
You know, the president has a way with words. You have to give him that. And the image of Xi Jinping and Donald Trump having a big fat hug is I think a funny one to visualize. But no, I don't think that's going to be what happens at the summit. I think Beijing's goal is to receive an embattled, what they see as an embattled, weakened American president who's slipping in the polls, who seems to be at risk of losing his mandate, and to give him the biggest show on earth with marching bands and soldiers in formation and drone shows. They want to show him the power and the sophistication and the technological advancement of China and to make him feel like royalty. And they want to make him feel that way in a sense that he wants to respect Chinese civilization and that he feels like he doesn't want to pick a fight with China, as China does part of its sort of long-standing strategy, pressing U.S. treaty allies and U.S. partners in the region. That is Xi Jinping's goal. He thinks he can achieve it through diplomacy. And if President Trump thinks that having China on board is the best way to get his Middle East peace locked down, I don't think China's going to disabuse him of that idea.
Just before we move on, I can try and tie a bow around this discussion. Just quickly fact-checking Trump again. Do you understand that China has agreed not to send or to sell any more weapons to Iran? Do we know that from any other source other than the president?
I mean, I don't think the president's own administration believes that, which is why they've just released information to the Financial Times today that Iran is using Chinese satellites to kill Americans and strike U.S. bases. So I don't see how much clearer you can get than that China is, if anything, ramping up its support for Iran in this war. China sees this as a unique opportunity to entice the United States to expend all of its high-end precision munitions against Iran rather than holding them back and potentially using them in a fight over Taiwan.
Yeah, well, the spokesperson from China's foreign ministry, Ike, said this of the US blockade. It will only heighten tensions, escalate the situation, undermine the already fragile ceasefire, and further jeopardise the safety of passage through this waterway. He added, "This is dangerous and irresponsible behaviour." So to the question of what might China do from here, what could they do? Trump has changed the world, changed alliances. You speak to it a little bit already. Changed Europe as it rushes to rearm. What chance China will do anything other than the risk-averse type of thing they always have and sort of play the long game here?
China has a long-term view, and they want Taiwan. They want Taiwan because it's the first step towards expelling the United States from the Indo-Pacific region, breaking U.S. alliances, leaving countries like Australia undefended and indefensible, establishing hegemonic control over the economies of the Indo-Pacific region, where the most important supply chains in the world are, and eventually leveraging that to make themselves number one in the world, take all of the most important industries from the United States and other Western countries, bring them to China, and create a new world order where China leads and everyone follows. And, this is not only about Taiwan. It's also about, the character of regional order in the Indo-Pacific region. And the concerning thing is that what Iran has shown is that a country without a leader, without an air force, without a navy, can still take 20% of global oil supply offline just by threatening to fire some drones. And if Iran can do that in the Strait of Hormuz, what happens if China uses similar tactics in the Taiwan Strait, threatening 99% of the world's advanced semiconductors? So I think the United States needs to treat this as a wake-up call. They should not snooze the alarm. Greater economic coercion is coming. It is coming in the Western Pacific, and we are running out of time to get ready.
Trump has threatened tariffs of 50% on China if it gets involved. What card does China have to play here? What are China's options? How can they apply pressure here? Is it down to something like rare earths if they need to? Have they got that option to play that card?
I doubt that President Trump will play the tariffs. Both sides want their trade truce to continue. That's the whole point of the Beijing summit. They need to extend the trade truce. And both sides believe that it's working for them. I think President Trump was surprised and impressed when China responded to his tariffs by retaliating. I think he was surprised that the critical minerals weapon seemed to be so effective, that he discovered that within days he was getting calls from Ford and other major U.S. manufacturers saying they would have to shut down production. Now, the fact that the administration was surprised by that is, pretty appalling, given that the last administration warned them specifically on the way out that this is what China would do. But China has a whole lot more choke points that it can press on if it wants to coerce the United States economically. The active pharmaceutical ingredients, essentially the essential inputs to medicines that save lives in the United States. There's a whole lot of other examples of how China could weaponize these dependencies or threaten to weaponize them. The Trump administration could be hustling to break these dependencies, but they're not. And so I think China has leverage and it's not afraid to use it. And that's why the Trump administration, I think, doesn't want to reopen the door to trade war.
What would a perfect end to this conflict look like from the Chinese perspective?
The Iran conflict.
Yes.
I think the perfect end would involve the U.S. expending the rest of its long-range precision missiles, Tomahawks and JASSMs, as well as its air defenses, known as the Patriot or PAC-3 interceptors. If the United States does all this, then it's essentially militarily helpless. It can't defend Taiwan or Japan or South Korea against bombardment. And it would be much easier for China to coerce Taiwan into submission without firing a shot, because the U.S. wouldn't dare to fight in Taiwan's defense. I think the U.S. realizes that it's reaching a tipping point where each additional one of these munitions that it expends is putting it in a dire situation in Asia. So I think this is part of why the Trump administration is moving to negotiations. But I think if China can tempt the Trump administration to return to bombing, it would be very happy to tolerate a higher oil price for a few weeks. Once these missiles are spent, they will take years to build back. And in terms of the regional order, China doesn't want to replace the United States as the policeman of the region. They don't want to be in charge of keeping Hormuz open and keeping Israel from Iran and Iran from fighting. But they would like the United States to be seen as an unreliable actor that's nevertheless responsible for doing the policing and the cleanup.
Brilliant. Eyck Freymann is a Hoover Fellow at Stanford University and an expert in global energy policies and China. He's also authored the book Defending Taiwan, a strategy to prevent war with China. Eyck, good to see you. Great to listen to you. We appreciate your time and your insight. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
And so with that, what do you think? Is Trump going to get that big fat hug from Xi Jinping? And more importantly, could China actually up its game and try to help end this conflict around the Strait of Hormuz? Let us know in the comments. And of course, if you like this video, please hit that like button. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next time.